Hey everybody, welcome to Author Talk. I'm Sarah Donovan, and we are having conversations with authors who contributed so generously to Just YA, an anthology of short poems, essays, and fiction for students grades 7 through 12 and their teachers. And we are just so grateful to have the authors generously contribute into the paperback, which you can purchase, and I'll have a link below. Also, open access, so totally free, copyright open access so teachers can make as many copies as they wish and share them with students as they wish. So we are here today with Laura Shovan, and thank you so much for joining us. Laura, will you tell us where you
Hi.
are in the world and what's happening?
Yes, I am in Central Maryland. I live right in between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. And what's happening? It's sunny out. We had rain after a very dry period, so it's a good Monday morning.
Well, Laura, I wonder if you could say just a little bit about how you became a writer and how you came to
Mhm.
name yourself as a writer.
I knew that I wanted to be a writer from the time I was in middle school. So when I was in high school, I was involved with the literary magazine and the yearbook, and became co-editor of the literary magazine. Um, I got to go to the biggest poetry festival in the United States. It's the Dodge Poetry Festival in New Jersey, and I got to go as a high school senior to the very first one, and it was my first time hearing poetry read and performed live. So that was a really important experience. And I taught high school for a few years and advised the literary magazine and the newspaper for a while. So writing has always just been part of my life alongside education, alongside being an educator. So I've been a poet in the schools for my state arts council for many years. And more recently, I teach adults who are getting their MFAs in creative writing, not creative writing, let me specify, writing for children and young adults at Vermont College of Fine Arts. And I love working as an educator with people who see themselves as writers and who want to learn more and improve their craft. So that's kind of the basics of it. It's always been a combination of writing and education, where those two things intersect is where my work has been.
What do you love to write about more than anything?
Oh boy, what do I love to write more? I don't, it's not so much the about, it's the more about the what's interesting me at the moment. So it's more for me about my passions or having an idea that that won't let go of my mind. And um, those are the things that I tend to write about. I tend to get like really interested in something, and then in some form or another, whether it's an essay or an article or a poem or starting work on a book or a picture book or whatever it is, it's driven by the things that I'm really passionate about and interested in.
Okay, love that. Yes, love that. And I think we're also we're celebrating the literature, but we're also thinking about how this anthology can help teachers and students find their own voice and also inspire more creative, student-centered writing. Um, and I think finding out what our students are passionate about and what they really want to say to the world is one of the key things. And so often our curriculum drives what students are writing about instead of the students choosing or figuring out what they want to say.
I totally agree. I think in my work as a poet in the schools, I mostly work with elementary schoolers, sometimes older students. And it's, when we ask them, like when I'm putting together a lesson or a workshop for, especially for younger ones, asking them to write on a topic that allows them a way in. So, I might have them do a list poem of some kind, and I might model, all right, we're going to list all of the things that happen when you're on the school bus in the morning. But when it's your turn to write, okay, now think about, list all of the things that happen when you're practicing violin or when you're at soccer, so that there's I'm giving them some boundaries and I'm giving them a form, but they have their own interests again, that they can plug into that. And I've had a lot of experiences where students in the classroom will say to one of their peers, I didn't know that about you. And poetry in particular, I think, is a really great way to give students the space to write about their lives and their interests. It's just that combination of having enough form, enough structure in what we're asking them to do, but also enough room for them to come in and fill that space with the things that they're interested in and what's on their minds.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I think, yeah, the list is a great way in, and I agree. Like the number of times as a teacher, I learned like, wow, I didn't know that you were an expert in making tea, or I didn't know that you even played the violin. Like that's never come up before.
Right, right.
So yeah, all those things that kind of come up once you get them talking about it, and the students are driving it, and that's where
Yeah.
the passion kind of comes from. So
It's also, I think it's reflective of the students as a whole person. I think poetry in particular recognizes more of the person as a whole and not just in the role of student, or this is the kid who's known as an athlete in class, this is a kid who's known as the theater kid in class, and allowing again the space for students to write about the whole of themselves and not just who they are or how they present themselves in school.
yeah, yeah, that's so great. Well, you have several wonderful poems in this anthology that I'm just really so grateful that you shared with us. And
Thank you
the
too.
anthology,
I'm also grateful that these poems have a home in this book. It's just such a wonderful collection.
thanks. Well, I think that's part of, imagining it with like love, land, world, futures, and beings, like the different text sets or the different sections in here allow for a range of ideas, and also some of the poems could and essays could be in different sections. They could be in multiple
Mhm,
sections as well.
mhm.
But a it invites authors like you and others who have a range of interests and topics and things that you're working on, so that there's space to use your voice in different subjects, and it doesn't always have to be sort of the same topic. And so that's a lovely representation, I think, in this book as well, to have your poems in different sections and say, oh yeah, Laura writes on different topics, and you can too. It doesn't always have to be the same thing, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, what would you like to share with us today?
I think that I'd like to start with this poem, There Must Be a Gate.
Okay.
And this poem was first published in an anthology called This Is What America Looks Like.
Mm.
And I wrote it, I think probably in 2017, and I was working on a project with some other writers. This is a writing prompt that the former state poet laureate of Maryland, Grace Cavalieri, uses quite often, where you pull 10 random words and you sort of write the poem around those 10 words. So the poem has to contain those 10 words. And a group of us were using newspaper articles. So I don't have the newspaper article handy, but I pulled 10 words from this newspaper article and then created this poem, There Must Be a Gate. So I will read it and then we can talk about it a little bit.
Okay.
There must be a gate. Where there is a wall, there must be a gate, a way to enter the garden on the other side. Birds need no permission to migrate overhead. Moles tunnel the earth to get through. For them, brick and concrete are inconsequential. Barbed wire, a human concern. We must pass through the gap, if one exists, wingless, clawless, on the same 2 feet that carried us days and miles to reach this wall. Identity vouchers and proof of public education are sewn into our pockets. There must be a gate, we tell ourselves. We have seen this wall before.
Just felt myself holding my breath as you were reading, and then I just sort of exhaled heavily. Sorry. What stands out to you as you read this aloud again?
Well, I see, it's interesting. I see in this poem the reference to the garden on the other side. I grew up with the Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. So there is this sort of pull from that source of, wanting to be on the other side of something, being in a place of distress and seeing this place that you conceive of as beautiful and desirable on the other side and not having a way to get through. Um, also politically, obviously, I was thinking about at the time the border wall was being built and coming at this poem from a place of empathy and thinking about people who are approaching the wall from the other side of our country and what their feelings might be like. Um, and and yet the poem in a way kind of has a bird's eye view as well. It's kind of looking at this situation from quite a distance, um, at the same time, because you've got that, that bird flying overhead. And so yeah, I think it makes me sad, actually. This poem makes me really sad. And yet this is a very human story. This is a story that doesn't just happen in our country, it's happening around the world now, and in a way always has. This idea of, who's on one side of this wall and who's on the other side.
Mm, mm.
And you'll have to excuse me for a second. I have allergies.
Ah,
Grab a tissue. Okay.
yes, no, it's good. We were thinking, yeah, I mean, this it's human. It's human. You have allergies. We have pups, pups barking or trucks driving. I think we want to remember like where we are in the world, I think. And really your poem and these places transform us for a moment. Like, it's being in this time and place and reading the poem. One of the things we've been talking about with the teachers that I'm working with at OSU is this concept of intertextuality and how so many kind of texts from our lives work their way into these spaces and have these memories and connections. And the things that you had said about, um, just the political environment and the border wall of our country. And also, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about Holocaust and genocide studies this year. And so
Mhm.
I see such imagery in all of those just um, atrocities and systematic violence
Mhm.
that's intentional and organized, and how the walls are put up by other people. Yeah, and it is such it's a human act and a human concern, and it's a dividing force. And yet, um, one of the beautiful things about your poetry is that you have a gate in here,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
there's a possibility and there's hope, and that we can make and create gates just as well as we can make and create walls. Um, and that's sort of looking for things to hold on to, when we're having a hard time in our lives or in our communities. Poetry can be a place to find us, um, the gate, and can be the gate,
Mhm.
I think, for us. So there's so
I like
much here that's lovely.
I like that you're kind of centering the gate in this. And I also think in the last line, we have seen this wall before, that there's in that last line, there's something about the fact that this isn't new. Um, and we've survived, the people in the poem, the we of the poem has survived this before and will survive it again. So there's definitely a note of hope at the end of the poem. Um, yeah.
Oh my gosh. And gosh, Laura, like this poem is so prophetic. I think I was just with a colleague, on Tuesday or Wednesday, and that's what the comfort from her to me was saying, like, we've been here before, um, and we've seen this before, and so we have some sense of what's ahead,
Mhm.
uh, and therefore we can also be proactive and and take steps
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
action and protection and all that. And I thought, I'm like, my gosh, I'm reading that in your poem again here.
Yeah. I think too that there's a nod when I stop and think about it, there's a nod to the absurdity of it as well,
Uh,
because we are animals and we are the only animals who create these kind of political walls.
mhm.
And again, that's, a nod back to the Alice books is, they're absurdist. So there's definitely a kind of like, step back and look at what we're doing. And we are the only animals that do this
Yeah, yeah,
in this way. So yeah, it's really interesting to think about just this topic of migration, human migration, and how different governments deal with it. Um, but I always try to come from a place of empathy. And so when you have empathy, you do have to look at both sides. You do have to consider both sides and try to understand what is motivating all of the players in this situation.
yeah. Well, thank you for that, Laura. And I
Thank
think,
you.
for teachers, they can read this as a very figuratively and literally, and it gives them, whatever conversations they're ready to have in the classroom. This poem welcomes all of it.
Yeah,
Um,
thanks. And I just want to again put in a plug for that writing prompt for teachers is, if you're doing current events, this is such a great way to engage with current events in a program, pro, in a poem, by when students are choosing those 10 words out of a newspaper article, that's going to be the start of, what is sparking their interest, where are they what are they picking up on in the article, and then how are they transforming it. It's back to that. I was just talking with somebody about Bloom's taxonomy, so it's back to like that synthesis.
yeah,
What do I take from this article and then make something new with it?
yes, yes. And they have agency in doing that, right?
Right,
Right when we need
exactly.
them to.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, speaking of beautiful and ideas for writing, you have several poems, but you're going to share one more with us. Do you want to talk about it first or read it first?
Sure, I'll talk about it. This poem is on page 78. If you have the book, it's called Haibun, My Girlfriend's House. And Haibun is a Japanese form that is related to and incorporates haiku. Um, I'm not an expert by any means. Japanese forms in particular, people spend their lives studying these forms. But what I will tell you about it is it's a combination of a prose poem and a haiku. And the haiku, right, can appear anywhere on the page. So the haiku can come first, it can come in the middle of the prose. Um, I think I, most of the time when I've read a haibun, the haiku tends to come at the end, but that's not always the case. And what's really interesting to me is that you've got the prose piece tends to be narrative. It tends to tell a little bit of a story. And the haibun is not a continuation of that story. It's either a commentary on it or it sits in tension with the prose in some way or illuminates the prose in some way. And for me, it's a really interesting form because I often actually talk with my students about using titles in a similar way to how a haiku is used in a haibun, that a title in a poem can have some kind of tension or be a commentary on the poem. It doesn't have to kind of point directly at this is what the poem is about. So anyway, I'll read the poem and then we can talk about it. And this is a persona poem, so it's told in the voice of a teenage boy who has a new girlfriend. Hi, Bun, my girlfriend's house. The first time I have dinner with her family, it's chaos. She has too many brothers, and I have none. Her father is a megaphone, blasting jokes, opinions, questions over beef stew. What do your parents do? What are you going to study in college? Play any sports? There are 6 of us at the table, everyone's hands reaching and grabbing. You had 2 rolls already. That's mine. Only her mother is calm, spooning stew into her mouth. She speaks underneath the noise. Why don't you 2 go for a walk? The boys will clear up. The uproar. They're still complaining as we slip out the door. There's an abandoned house my girlfriend wants to show me. She takes my hand, leads me to twin tire tracks through the woods. The sun is setting on the mossy house. She points to the yellow paint and white curtains printed with flowers. Someone lived here, she says. Someone cared about this place. But to me, the house is like a pat of butter melting, and the woods are hungry for something to tear apart. Beware of dog sign, fused to tree trunks, thick bark, silent forest. So as I was thinking about this poem this morning, I that haiku at the end is just a reminder that the boy and the girl in this situation are reading things very differently. The dinner, while it's chaotic and there's so much going on, is familiar and comfortable to the girl, and that's reflected in how she views this decaying house. Somebody lived here, somebody loved this place. She's seen the signs that this was taken care of. And what the boy is seeing is the rot. He's seeing what's wrong. He's seeing the beware of dog sign. And so you've got these 2 characters who are really coming at things from a very different point of view in the way they're viewing the situation. And that's kind of all baked into the imagery of the poem.
Yes. Yes, I think this is lovely and really craftful, Laura. And I think there's so much happening here that you have illuminated in just, a little, explaining the poem, the craft of creating the hyphen, and then also how you use the prose piece with the haiku to comment on it or to kind of talk back and and surface that different perspective. You also use and so people can click on the link and you can see the actual text on Open OK State. But you're using italics instead of quotations,
Mhm.
quotation marks to show the dialogue, which would be more interrupting. Like it would be more of an intrusion, I think, if, when teachers teach narrative technically in schools
Mhm.
and their students are writing a personal narrative or, I mean, a persona poem is great to think about fiction, like encouraging students to do a little bit of fiction writing. But they're going to say, you got to make a new paragraph and indent and put in the quotes and have the taglines and all of that really
Yeah,
stretches it out and interrupts the flow where you have this embedded with the italics, which just kind of calls attention to the dialogue
yeah.
and the different voices without, stretching it across the page. So it still has this poetic
It's
feeling
so
to it.
interesting that you brought that up because when I write narrative poems with dialogue, I tend to use quotation marks. And I think when I'm looking at this poem, the italics in a way, because everybody who's speaking is sort of denoted in the same way, they're all in italics.
Mhm.
He's the speaker, the boy is sort of everybody, all of these people are together, they're almost in a way, one voice. They're all separate from him, and you see that that's reflected in the text. So what everybody else is saying is separated in the italics from his thoughts, which are in the standard font, prose, whatever. What word do I want? Font, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think those are choices to think about, like what choices you want to try or giving, having students try that, put that in quotes and see how that works and put it in italics and see how that works. And let's talk about the purpose and how it works versus how it looks in appearance, how it sounds,
Mhm.
what you're going for, what sort of rhetorical effect that you want, which is another, thing that we've been talking a lot about with the state standards and how teachers tend to really like be concerned about grammar and standard grammar and correct grammar. And even though the standards say that we want it to be rhetorically meaningful language use. So language use, not correct grammar, but language use and how to use it in the context. And I think when we're writing in poetry or writing in Haibun, we become more conscious of our language use, I think,
Mhm.
um, in
Yeah,
contrast to whatever essay we're writing, you know.
and this form in particular, it's but the form itself, the visual is important. That separation, that gap between the haiku and the rest and the prose piece is really important. So when you're working on a form like this that has a visual element, you are thinking pretty deeply about what the form looks like on the page. And I also want to say, it's formatted so beautifully here. A prose poem is like a block of text. It's not sort of, it's how do how do I want to say it, Sarah? It's justified on both sides.
Yes.
And now that we're getting into the nitty gritty, so it should look like a block when you're doing a prose poem. So it doesn't look like standard prose. You don't have the sort of the indent at the beginning of the paragraph.
Hmm.
You don't have this sort of like space at the end of the line. And so yeah, the visuals are really important and poetry in general, but I think in a haibun in particular, because you want that block of text kind of again in tension with that short little 3 line poem, or haiku doesn't have to be 3 lines, but the short little poem.
Yeah.
Um, it's almost like a little star, a little asterisk at the
Yeah.
end of the poem, or yeah.
I mean, it's really great. And you're also making me think about, well, you know, in teaching junior high for almost 20 years and even now when we're teaching the teachers and we're writing sort of fiction or narrative or biography or something, I find that endings are really hard.
Mhm.
Conclusions, wrapping things up, deciding how you want to close and leave the reader and wrap up what you need to. And I think, well, this is a great technique to even try in any sort of story maybe or even closing a piece of fiction or closing a chapter or something with a hyphen and a haiku. That might be a really cool way to write a book even with every chapter ending in a
Mhm.
hyphen.
I think that just a nice model might be Jacqueline Woodson's Brown Girl Dreaming. Even though it's not haibun, she uses haiku as a kind of a commentary throughout the story. So the narrative of the story is told in free verse, but there are these occasional haiku uh, that are interstitials. They come throughout the story, and they're always sort of like a commentary on the action. They're not part of the ongoing narrative, but they comment on what's happening, or kind of like you said, they're kind of like reflecting back on what's happening in the story. So that's a good model to look at.
Oh, thank you for reminding me. It's been a while since I have read that, and I think, yeah, and I will notice it better this time. Well, thank you so much for talking us through these poems, and you have several other in the anthology that I will link in the comment section. I wonder, as we close, what are you working on now? What's coming up for you?
I'm working on a middle grade novel. It's a climate fiction story set on the Chesapeake Bay. I'm working on a mystery, a younger middle grade mystery with my friend Nancy Krulik. Um, and the character in this poem, the Haibun that we just read, and in the poem Bridge, is a character from a verse novel, a YA verse novel that I'm working on. So it's been really interesting to get to know his voice.
How do you keep track of these multiple projects?
Well, I'm really trying hard to focus on this climate fiction story because I've been working on it for several years. But yeah, that's just, I guess, how my brain works. I've always got multiple projects, and I'm working on one, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about the other ones as well.
Yeah, thank you. Um, Anything you want to say before we close? Words to teachers, to readers?
Oh, that's such a so I think what I want to say is, and I've kind of said this before, with poetry in particular, you're going to have um, I compared it to a stream, right? So you're going to approach the stream, which is the poem, and you're going to have students who are like, nope, this is not for me. This is nature. We're outside. I'm not getting near that thing. Okay. You're going to have students who might kind of dip their toes in and or put their fingers in and sort of like feel what's going on with this stream and have a little bit of an experience. And you might have kids who are just like jump right in and they're up to their knees or up to their waist before you know it. And all of that is okay. So you're still sharing the poem and making space for the students to have an experience with it. And not every poem is going to land with, every student the same way. So all of that's okay. I think the most important thing is sharing the pieces that resonate with us in some way, because students will pick up on that. And we don't necessarily have to explain why they resonate with us. We just have to say, what about this poem are you responding to? What is it? Is there a line? Is there a thought that in some ways sort of like rang a bell for you? And it's enough to begin there. And that's it. That's my advice.
I love that ending. Just looking for enough. It's enough to begin there. And
Yeah,
sometimes that's all we need to hold on to.
that's right.
Thank you so much, Laura, for being with us.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it. And congratulations on the book. It's really beautiful. I have my copy,
It looks so.
which I'm really enjoying reading.
Thank you so much.